The ceasefire deal will make for more jihad, and Hezbollah's imam will pray out to his God at the big Trump party in D.C. there next week. The jihad's advancing and no one thinks it's odd or gives its victims even so much as a nod. Yet there's always hope, even when things look bleak. The truth will always win over the jihadi's demon god. This is This Week in Jihad. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here with the great David Wood, and I am Spencer, author of Quran. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, David. How are you?
Hey, how's it going? How's it going, Robert?
It is never better. The world is exploding. The world is on fire. And the real God is somehow doing something that we're going to figure out later. In the meantime, we got some jihad for us tonight. And that's always
can't be.
exciting.
I haven't heard about any jihad this week. And I check CNN every day.
Well, I suppose the big news is that the jihad is over. Peace and love, John and Yoko, it's all there. The ceasefire is in, and Gaza is at peace. And now, as you have often remarked that Islam is a religion of peace, we actually will see it in action. What do you think of this exciting development, this amazing world historical ceasefire?
I think Trump wanted to come into office like Reagan back in the day. This is a little before my time. It's a little before my time, Robert. Wasn't it the case that there were like a bunch of hostages and Jimmy Carter, the super nice guy, peanut farmer, was in power, and so jihadis of the world just were not scared of him at all. And then like Reagan was about to take office, and they're like, free the hostages, free the hostages. Am I remembering that right? Because I was a tiny
on the
kid.
Day that he was inaugurated, the hostages were freed. The signal could not have been clearer that we have contempt for Jimmy Carter and we fear Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, and I think Trump wants things like that. And so what I think is he contacted Netanyahu in Israel and said, hey, I want this deal to be done before I go into power, so I can basically roll in there like Ronald Reagan and show that the world so recognizes a strong leader that they will start throwing down their arms and making deals and so on. I obviously, I'm sure like you, have my concerns about the deal, because the main thing you would be looking for after an attack like that, if you're Israel, is one, you want your hostages back, and two, you want Hamas destroyed so they can never do that again, right? And Netanyahu has made it clear, like all along from day one, we're gonna keep at this until we get our hostages back, until Hamas surrenders or is destroyed. So he's clear all along on that, and all of a sudden, hey, we're going to make a deal, and Hamas will actually survive. We'll get the hostages back, but Hamas will survive. That's a very dangerous message. So we've talked in the past about so what's the sort of takeaway message? And for everyone who is screaming ceasefire all along, that keep in mind, I get why people are doing that, right? You're looking at it, there's an ongoing war. I get why people are like, can't you just stop? Can't you just stop all this? That makes sense on a short-term basis. But do you want the real takeaway message to be, hey, if you're a terrorist, go kill a bunch of people, then just run and hide, and we'll give up after a while. We'll give up. And then we'll say, okay, now you can come back out and do it again. Do you want that to be the takeaway lesson? That's a very dangerous message to send. Whereas the alternative, we're going to keep coming after you until your entire group is completely destroyed. That's a good message to send to future terrorists, that it doesn't matter where you hide, we will keep hunting for you until we find you. There is no scenario where you escape alive after you've done this to our country. So that's the message you kind of want to send to people. And so now you're sending the wrong message. No, it is the case. If you go and hide in tunnels long enough, and we'll give up and sign a deal and let you go, and then release a bunch of your friends and so on. Dangerous message. But I was just telling AP when we were talking about this, I believe there's a deal behind the deal. In other words, if Israel, after all this time fighting and saying, we're not stopping until Hamas is wiped out, and then to sign a deal where Hamas may actually continue to exist and have a political future ahead of them, I'm sure there's a deal behind the scenes like, hey, do this. I know you do not want to do this. I know this goes against what you've said, but I'm asking you to do this. And in exchange for you doing this, here's what I'm going to do for you in the future in this other situation that will be very, very beneficial towards you. Whatever happened, I think it's a good enough deal behind the scenes for Netanyahu to say, yeah, know what, that is we will do what you want because there is this other deal that we want. So anyway, I assume there's something like that behind the scenes.
Couple of considerations about that, David. One is that let me get it here. Trump he signaled something like that in his message on Truth Social about the deal, because he said, with this deal in place, my national security team, through the efforts of Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, and we'll get back to him in a minute, will continue to work closely with Israel and our allies to make sure Gaza never again becomes a terrorist safe haven. Now, David, I have the same reservations that you have about this. Seems to me that all this time Israel's been saying Hamas is going to be completely destroyed as an organization. And as you have mentioned many times on this program in the past, that's the only way you deal with jihadis. That you make it impossible for them to act. They're never going to give up. They're going to keep coming. And so if Hamas had been destroyed, it would not have ended the jihad. It would have just set it back a little while, but that's all to the good. There were decades, there were many long periods in which the jihadis were essentially quiescent because they were so much weaker than the opposing forces. So it would have been great to destroy Hamas. Now, does Trump not know what Hamas is all about when he says Gaza will never again become a terrorist safe haven? Because if Gaza exists, if Hamas exists rather, then Gaza is going to be a terrorist safe haven. And if he is serious about what he's saying, then I think it's very possible that you are correct, that there is some side element to this deal, some secret part of this deal that makes it more palatable to Israel. The other possibility is that Israel was simply left without any choice, because Joe Biden has been appeasing the jihadis ever since he got into office. He sent at least $20 billion to Iran, which means that the United States has been funding the Palestinian Jihad, which Iran funds. And he has pressed Israel on many occasions not to finish the deal. He pleaded, he threatened them, not pleaded, he threatened them not to go into Rafah. They went into Rafah anyway. And all the things he claimed would happen did not happen. And the Israelis turned out to be correct. But the job ain't done. And Biden was going to do everything to continue to prevent them from doing it, or Kamala Harris was going to continue to try to stop them. So a lot of people thought that Trump, well, it was perfectly reasonable to think it, because Trump said, if I'm elected, I'm going to help the Israelis finish this job. And now it seems like he's stopping them short of finishing the job. And so the Israelis think, well, Biden's not going to let us do it, and now Trump's not going to let us do it. And so we got no choice. And we have to just go along with this, because if without the United States, they're completely isolated on the world stage.
I think it's the first one.
I hope so.
And
I hope you're right.
And here's the thing: I think it's actually testable. In other words, I think in the next year or two, you'll see what the deal behind the scenes was. Like it's going to be Abraham Accords 2.0 and so on, and Saudi Arabia agrees to get along with Israel and so on, and everyone unites against Iran and crushes Iran. I think there are other plans in the future, but if there are, then we're going to see them in the very near future. And if not, then yep, maybe it was just they were just completely forced into a crap deal.
Look, I hate to be the one to throw the rotting cabbage on the sofa, but it is often the role I play in this world. And another piece of evidence to the contrary is Witkoff himself, who seems to be just another one of these guys who has no idea what he's really dealing with. And he praised the role of Qatar in these negotiations, and praised the Prime Minister of Qatar for doing what he said was God's work during the negotiations. Now,
Well, Qatar's the good guys because they invest so much in American universities.
yeah, they love us. They had the Hamas guys there before and after October 7th. And Hamas doesn't like the United States any more than it likes Israel. A lot of these people nowadays, they think, oh, well, we have to not ally with Israel and then everything will be okay. The jihad will only start with Israel, and then comes the main course. But in any case, Witkoff doesn't seem to have a clue. And then there's the other part of this that is not related to the deal, but may illuminate whether the deal is some sort of a canny chess move or a bonehead capitulation to the jihadis. And that is, the inauguration is coming up Monday, and who's going to give one of the benedictions? David. Have you heard this?
Hero Imam of Dearborn, perhaps?
You are correct, sir. Let me get him here. There he is.
I still don't think it'll happen.
Really? I hope you're right.
I think he'll be pulled beforehand.
This is Husham al-Husseini, and he has been notorious for years, as you say, the hero imam of Dearborn. He's a big fan of Hezbollah and of the Islamic Republic of Iran. In a 2022 video, he says, Iran is the light. The Islamic Republic is the light of the world. It's going all over the world now. And he, of course, has attacked in the United States. He's faked Islamophobic hate crimes. He's called for restrictions on the freedom of speech in accord with Sharia blasphemy laws, forbidding burning of the Quran, but also forbidding criticism of holy figures, which means, of course, you say anything like Muhammad was a pedophile who married a 6-year-old girl and had sex with her when she was 9, and you end up getting fined or imprisoned.
Oh, hang on, Robert. I mean, there's no reason for people to be offensive in pointing out the fact that Muhammad was a child molesting, murdering rapist. But I mean, you don't need to go around saying that. So, I mean, it might hurt people's feelings.
Can you whisper it?
Okay.
Anyway, this is Husham al-Husseini. And this is the guy. He's going to be giving one of 4 benedictions at the inauguration. And not only is he giving one of the 4 benedictions, but this seems to be the work. I would guess, okay? I don't have any direct knowledge on this, but it seems to be, let me just throw this out here for you and for the watching world. Massad Boulos. Massad Boulos has been appointed by Trump as his special envoy for Arab and Middle East affairs. Who is Massad Boulos? Well, he's a Lebanese businessman. He's a Christian, but his father. Now, I understand, David, this is tenuous. You know, if you start talking about me and then you say, and his family does this and that, well, not everybody in my family do I agree with. And so that doesn't necessarily say anything about me at all. And so with that caveat, Massad Boulos, his father-in-law, was a key figure in a Christian party in Lebanon that was pro-Hezbollah. And he is Tiffany Trump's, Donald's daughter, Tiffany Trump's father-in-law. So, and he's now Trump's advisor for Middle East affairs. Did Massad Boulos have anything to do with Husham al-Husseini giving a benediction at the inauguration? I mean, if the guy supports Hezbollah, which is perfectly reasonably possible. I'm not saying he does. I don't know. But I know that I've met plenty of Lebanese Christians who love Hezbollah. And it's certainly within the realm of possibility that Massad Boulos also does. Is it possible that he thought, oh, this guy supports Hezbollah, al-Husseini, but what's the big deal? And let's have him at the inauguration to show what a big tent we are and how Trump loves everybody.
I think I think all this stuff is actually connected. And while there may be things as far as like who's actually networking and so on, there may be these guys may all be involved like behind the scenes and so on. But I think it's pretty straightforward in that If you remember, a lot of Muslims and Muslim leaders in Michigan came out and supported Trump when that was
Yes.
one of the battleground states, and it could be a situation where every vote is going to count. And so it's good in Michigan, especially the Detroit and Dearborn areas and so on, to get some votes from Muslims. And then you're sitting there wondering, why in the name of common sense would these Muslims be speaking out for Trump and saying, "Yep, we're switching sides and we're going with Trump. We're destroying our traditional alliance with the left, and we're siding with Trump now." Sitting there thinking, why are they doing this? And it's the same situation I'm looking at going, there's a deal behind the scenes. There's a deal behind the scenes of Trump saying, you come out and help me win here and throw your support behind me. Here's what I will do in return for you when I'm president. And so I think they agreed and said, fine, we will do that. But I think it's some things like, I guarantee you I will get a ceasefire deal. I'll have one of your guys come and do something at my inauguration and so on. I think it's a situation like that. He's the guy who wrote the Art of the Deal. So anytime Trump's involved, I'm looking at this going, oh, someone just changed their mind about this big thing and started doing this. There's obviously some sort of deal behind. I don't know exactly what the deal is, but obviously a deal behind the scenes. So I think we're seeing these behind the scenes deals play out in front of us.
Okay. Well, time will tell.
Time will tell.
One thing is certain, life goes on. And so we will see how these things shake out in the coming days and weeks. And I think that we've amply indicated that there are causes for concern, but it's not necessarily as bad as all the naysayers, including me, are saying. And so we'll see. Meanwhile, David, last time we were here a couple weeks ago, there had just been a jihad attack in New Orleans. And I have the follow-up story from KERA News, NPR for North Texas. What do you think the headline is?
Guy turns out to be a white nationalist.
Close.
No, I don't know.
This is the headline. This act has no place in Islam. Muslims
Shocker.
worry about Islamophobia after New Orleans attack.
Yeah. No, I was just joking, but if I were to give a serious answer, it would be something like that, defending Islam and then being concerned about the real victims after every Islamic terrorist attack. And as we know, no matter how many thousands of non-Muslims are killed in a terrorist attack, it's Muslims who are the real victims and Islam that is the real thing that needs to be protected after every attack.
Indeed. And that's what this story is all about. Bassem Hamid, one of the imams at the mosque at Houston's Medical Center Islamic Society. They were dealing with Houston Muslims because the Shamsuddin Jabbar was from Houston. And he went over to New Orleans for his attack. Anyway, Bassem Hamid, one of the imams at this medical center mosque, he says, as Muslims, we condemn this incident, this horrific act, with the most severe and clearest statement. This act has no place in Islam and has no place among Muslims, and it's not accepted by any standard. There is no excuse and there is no justification for it. Well, then that's great, right? We can go bowling. Everything's good.
Yeah, it's just weird how so many different Muslims from countries around the world all conclude that it does teach you to terrorize the unbelievers in the name of Allah. But I don't know.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Weird that so many people misunderstand it in exactly the same way, as you've pointed out before.
And Bassem Hamid never, just like every last other guy who's ever said this, he doesn't give any clue as to what he intends to do to prevent other Muslims from misunderstanding Islam in the same way.
And if we were to suggest, hey, why don't we all get together and go through the Quran and the Hadith and see what it says about these topics, so that if it's not advocating this, then the people who think it does will be exposed. And if it is advocating this, then we can realize we've got a problem here. How would they react to such a, it seems like commonsensical thing. Hey, so this has nothing to do with our religion. Okay, but there are tons and tons and tons of Muslims who think it does have something to do with your religion. Therefore, why don't we get together? We'll have a big discussion. We'll bring up all these passages, discuss them, and you can show how these guys are completely misinterpreting all these passages calling for the violent subjugation of the entire world. How would they react to that? Obviously, they're going to be like, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do something about this problem.
Wouldn't that be the way that people would react if your church was full of terrorists? And they were saying Christianity is teaching us to carry out these acts of violence. It seemed like not only would the churches voluntarily begin such programs to make sure that no young Christians started to think this way, but the state would be demanding and the media would be demanding that these programs be instituted, and howling everywhere they weren't in place. And yet no mosque anywhere has a program to teach young Muslims to reject the understanding of Islam that Al-Qaeda and ISIS and all the others offer. Not a single one, and nobody seems to mind.
Yeah, there's a parallel with the grooming gangs in that matter of fact, there are two parallels with the grooming gangs, but one parallel with the grooming gang situation in the UK is you'll have Muslims sort of reluctantly go, oh yeah, we condemn all the grooming. It has nothing to do with Islam. But if we were to say, hey, why don't these guys obviously think that non-Muslims are inferior beings who can be treated like garbage in these situations. They obviously think that 11 and 12-year-olds are fair game for sex and so on. They obviously think that if they can take these young girls captives and so on, that they're just theirs and they can do whatever they want with them. Why don't we go through the Muslim sources and see if Islam actually condemns this sort of thing? Then it will be, no, we can't talk about that. That would be racist. That would be Islamophobic. It's like, wait, there are people who obviously believe that what they're doing is fine. Why don't we look at their sources? And if they're wrong, then you can show them where they're wrong. No, you must never bring up any of this. That doesn't sound like people who are confident that you can show from their sources that this stuff is wrong. When they instantly try to shut down any discussion of what their religion actually teaches. So that's one parallel. The other parallel is with the grooming gangs is when it's, oh yeah, we condemn that. Yeah, we condemn the grooming gangs. It's we have condemned it in a Twitter post, or we've condemned it in a letter. Like you can see how angry they are about something by how they react. So have something like Israel involved and tens of thousands of them are marching through the streets of every city on the planet every single day. That's what happens when they're really upset about something. How upset are they about the grooming gangs? How many marches are there? How upset are they after a terrorist attack where they go out and march in the streets and proclaim Islam as a religion of peace?
Where have we ever seen that?
Yeah, it doesn't really. So it's like they say, oh yeah, we have a problem with this. Really? Do you really? Because I've seen how you act when you really have a problem with something. I've seen exactly how you react when you're really upset about something. And you don't seem like you're upset, because I've seen what you're like when you're upset. I know exactly what you're like. I know exactly what your behavior it is when you are seriously upset. And when you go, oh yeah, I condemn this in a tweet, doesn't seem like you're really upset. It seems like you're just saying it so that you're on record as saying that you're not for it.
That's an excellent point. All right, there's more from the Houston Medical Center Islamic Society Mosque. Kulsum, not the great Egyptian singer, but a Muslim woman there in Houston, she said when she heard about the Jihad massacre in New Orleans, she said, the first fear in my mind was, I hope it's not someone from our community. That was the first fear. Now, what's wrong with this picture? Shouldn't her first fear have been, oh, I hope not, a lot of people didn't get killed. I hope it's not a terrible, massive carnage. But instead, the first thing she's afraid of is it's not someone from her community.
My community.
And
my community. It's always about them.
And note the anomaly here also. Why would she worry about that? Because what did the Imam say again? He said, this act has no place in Islam and no place among Muslims, and it's not accepted by any standard. So if they're all just there taking for granted that this has nothing to do with Islam, then why is she even worried that it might be somebody from the community?
Yeah, it makes no sense.
Where did she get this idea? You know, when I see terrorist attacks, I think, oh, I don't think rather, oh, I hope it's not somebody from my church. That never
Yep.
enters my mind because they don't go around doing terrorist acts. So,
And by the way, Robert, I've heard that numerous times. I've heard that numerous times. But the Muslims actually think they're saying something important. It's like, what were your first thoughts after this attack? Oh, I was thinking, oh, please don't let it be a Muslim. Please don't let it be a Muslim. You mean again
yep.
and again and again and again and again?
And 46,000 times since 9/11.
Yeah, 46,000. Please don't let this be 46,677th Islamic terrorist attack since 9/11.
Yep. Kulsum goes on. Then it's like, so she's already speaking as if she's from the San Fernando Valley. But anyway, then it's like, now what will happen? What next? What will be the Islamophobic
oh my
reactions?
Oh my goodness. They'll be attacking my community.
The Islamophobic reactions we might face in our community.
That's the big concern. Don't worry so much about all the people slaughtered in the name of your God. Just worry about people who might think that it makes your religion and your community look bad or be under suspicion. That's the only real tragedy after every terrorist attack where tons of people are killed in the name of Allah.
Muhammad Salama, who is another Muslim in this mosque there, he says, I lived through September 11th, and I have to this day have a very vivid memory of both how sad it was and then afterwards how difficult it was to be a Muslim in the U.S. and how concerned I was about practicing, simply just going to mosque. How difficult was it to be a Muslim in the U.S. after 9/11, David?
Well, there were mass people slaughtered. Oh, no, that was 9/11. Yeah, where were all the people marching through the streets slaughtering Muslims in the name of Jesus after 9/11? Where was that at? I must have missed that. Yeah.
Yep.
So what do they really mean about how difficult it was? They mean, they got randomly checked more at the airport and so on. It's things like that. And of course, it worked to their advantage because then they got to scream Islamophobia after everything. And they got to actually condition the media and politicians and so on so that no one would ever associate any of this with Islam. You'd be shouted down as a racist, Islamophobic, hate-mongering bigot. And so, like, what do you... journalists, politicians, everyone bent over backwards to promote and support your religion after 9/11. You had a wave of conversions after 9/11 because every news program wanted to show how not Islamophobic they are. So they'd all get Muslim speakers on there to say, and tell us how this has nothing to do with Islam because Islam is a religion of peace. And then the Muslim speaker comes, yes, Islam is a religion of peace. And this is the truth. And we love Jesus. You don't know it. We love Jesus. We have the final messenger, Muhammad, who loved Jesus. Yes, you should follow our religion. And people, really? Oh, well, it's great. So, I mean, but they're still the victims. They slaughter tons of people. Then instead of this causing the government and journalists to shine a spotlight on Muhammad's teachings about slaughtering unbelievers in the name of Allah, instead of that, no, we'll promote your religion. In fact, the more people you kill, the more we'll promote your religion. The more people you slaughter in the name of Allah, the more we'll promote and defend Allah and attack anyone who says one negative word about Allah or Muhammad or the Quran. That's what happened after 9/11. Don't give me this sob story. We're going to subjugate you. We're going to subjugate you. Islam will dominate the world. Hey, there was just terror. Guys, we're the victims here. We're victims. Everyone, pour us. That's all they do. They're either bragging in your face that they're going to subjugate you, or help, we're being oppressed.
And not only that, I didn't check, but I would wager that this mosque where these people are being interviewed was founded after 9/11. After 9/11, the number of mosques skyrocketed in the United States, as did the Muslim population. And so at this time, when Muslims are supposed to be being persecuted wholesale in the United States, they're actually being coddled, The media is bending over backwards to say Islam has nothing to do with this. The President of the United States said 6 days after 9/11, Islam has nothing to do with this. Don't be mean to Muslims, etc., etc. And that was the line that everyone followed ever after. And yet now it's supposed to be this terrible time of persecution. Meanwhile,
and these are, and by the way, these are the same people who, something happens in Israel and it's globalized the Intifada and Jews must never be safe anywhere and so on. That's how they react when someone does something. But it doesn't matter how many tens of thousands of Islamic terrorist attacks have happened. We are never under any circumstances allowed to look at anything or to be even slightly suspicious of any Muslim on the planet.
Indeed. So Bassem Hamid, the imam that's at this place in Houston, he also says that many individuals claim to be experts on Islam or leaders of the faith, but end up leading others astray. So you see, he's not talking about us. He's talking about Muslims who lead people astray. So we're actually maybe getting somewhere here. He says this is how people get radicalized, by getting exposed to unreliable sources of Islam. But
Like
here
the Quran
again,
and the Hadith.
well, yeah, because this only then raises the question again. Well, then where's your program to teach against their understanding of it? And he doesn't have one. Nobody's got one. But Walid Basyuni, the imam of another local mosque there, Clear Lake Islamic Center, he said that the Islamic Society of Greater Houston, oh no, I'm sorry, this is just a general statement. ISGH was horrified by the senseless crime targeting civilians. ISGH has a long-standing absolute zero tolerance policy against extremism and suspicious activity.
That's good.
The attack on civilians, regardless of their nationality, ethnicity, or religion, is an atrocity that no ideology or cause can justify. What do you think?
What books are they reading?
Well, they must be reading the Quran, right? It's a religion of peace.
No, because you get a very different idea from reading the Quran. Yeah, that's just ridiculous, idiotic nonsense. I mean, Robert, when the Muslim army of Muhammad showed up at Khaybar, as the Jews of Khaybar were heading out to their fields to tend their crops, and the Muslims swooped down upon them, did they go, "Oh no, these are civilians. We can't be attacking these people"?
They said, "Allahu Akbar." It goes hard for a city that's been warned.
Yeah, the Quran says, "Fight those who do not believe in Allah." It doesn't say only fight enemy combatants, but leave the civilians alone. Muhammad said, "I have been commanded to fight people until they say there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger." It doesn't say, "I've been commanded to only fight enemy combatants." The repeated commands that we find in the Quran and the Hadith are about fighting unbelievers simply for being unbelievers, not for being enemy combatants. Now, you are commanded to fight enemy combatants. That's very clear. But the final marching orders are to subjugate the world, and that includes civilians who have to be subjugated. So that's why they would never want to have a discussion about this. Not with Muslims who promote jihad, certainly not with us. But think about this. I mean, if you had a bunch of Christians who start interpreting the commands of Jesus as we need to go out and kill, we all need to get together with these guys. Please get together. Please, let's all get together. We'll get some Bible experts. We'll all sit down and get to the bottom of this, because you guys have some serious problems with the way you're interpreting Scripture. These guys never want to sit down and expose the jihadis. Why? Because the jihadis would completely expose and humiliate these people if they're serious. If they're serious and they think this stuff is peaceful, the jihadis would just absolutely obliterate them. The jihadis would be going, "Okay, tell me which part you don't understand. Fight those who do not believe." Which part of that Or which part of that is unclear? Oh, when he says fight those who do not believe, he only means like through debate and discussion. Wrong. Go to chapter 9, verse 111, same exact chapter. It defines what Allah means by fighting. It says they slay and are slain. This is about killing and getting killed. Which part are you not getting? Oh, well, what he really means there. And what you'd have is a bunch of people who just completely reinterpret everything Allah commands, even though, and what would the jihadis point out? Allah brags about being perfectly clear in his commands. Allah is perfectly clear in his commands. If he says, fight those who do not believe, he's not, oh, this is some sort of metaphorical speech. I'm using hyperbolic language when I really want you to just go out and hug everybody. They're not going to be allowed to, they're not going to get away with that. And so that's why they won't do this. They would get utterly humiliated if they tried to defend these claims and say that they're actually peaceful. So that's why they don't want a discussion. They don't want to discuss with us because they'd get humiliated. They don't want to discuss it with jihadis because they'd get humiliated. They'd get humiliated no matter what. So all you can do is scream, I'm a victim. You're an Islamophobe. Keep your mouth shut.
Yep. And there's more of it. Of course, another big story this week is that the after years of our calling attention to it, many others calling, actually not many others, but a handful of others, notably Tommy Robinson and a few others, calling attention relentlessly to the Muslim rape gangs. Now finally they're getting attention. And
awesome.
Meanwhile, there's more deception and more half-truths and lies. This is Dr. Taj Hargi of the Oxford Institute for British Islam. And he said something a little bit hair-raising this week. He said that the imams in Britain are still encouraging rape gang activity.
Huh.
And so
this guy said this?
Yeah.
That's good.
He's apparently a moderate Muslim. He's with the Oxford Institute for British Islam. And I think that in itself is a tip-off because a Salafi or any kind of hardline Muslim would say there's no British Islam. Islam is Islam, as Erdogan said. There's no moderate Islam. Islam is Islam. So anyway, but the thing is, Dr. Taj Hargi, while saying this, he also said some things that I thought were, well, they were false, David. He said that in the mosques, there's a perpetuation of them and us. The theology from the mosque and the elders is to perpetuate this idea of them and us. The criminality is fueled by the ideology of the Islamic fundamentalism, which has no basis in the Quran.
Wait. No basis in the Quran, Robert? This us versus them mentality?
That's what he said.
Wait, so if I'm opening the Quran, Robert, let's say I'm opening the Quran to, I don't know, Surah 3, verse 110, and I read that Muslims are the best of peoples ever raised up for mankind. And then I go over and read Surah 98, verse 6, let's say, that Jews, Christians, and polytheists are the worst of creatures. We're lower than dogs. We're lower than pigs. We're lower than insects. That's what I read in the Quran. And I actually have videos of Muslims saying this. Yes, the Quran, they're worse than dogs. They're worse than dogs. They're worse than cattle and so on. So somehow that wouldn't be what the Quran is saying. And if I go to passages like Surah 5, verse 51, do not take the Jews and the Christians for friends. They are friends of each other. If you do take them as a friend, you're one of them. So you're not even a Muslim if you take the side of the other people or even become friends with them. You're saying that I wouldn't find this us versus them mentality in the Muslim sources. It's not found there. It's some sort of radical teaching that is being taught in the mosques, but it's not to be found in the Muslim sources. Would this be another guy who's saying, hey, Islam is peaceful and tolerant, but if you said, okay, why don't we all get together and sit down and we'll go through these passages, and then the Muslims who believe these things can say, over and over again, we would ask, okay, why does Allah call Jews and Christians the worst of creatures? Because you're the worst of creatures, and that's what Allah says. That would be their response. And then, no, what Allah really means is something completely different from what he says in his perfectly clear speech over and over again. This is why they lose. This is why they lose. This is why they refuse to actually discuss this with the people who believe the Quran means what it says.
Hmm.
And it's the reason they have to shout everyone down with Islamophobe and bigot in order to
Yeah,
keep people from actually looking at this. It's why you have to do. It's why the peaceful Muslims have to do this. They have no case.
indeed. I think the best them versus us verse is 48:29. Muhammad is the apostle of Allah. Those who follow him are
Hmm.
ruthless to unbelievers, merciful to one another. And so he's saying this has no basis in the Quran. Has he read the book? But Dr. Taj Hargay also says, you're going to love this, David. These fundamentalist Muslims believe if the Prophet Muhammad can sleep with a 9-year-old, what's wrong with me sleeping with a 12-year-old, even though the story is not true?
Okay, so there are over 200 Sahih narrations in the Muslim sources giving the age of Aisha. Now, you would be skeptical of those sources. There are others, Joshua Little and so on, who are skeptical of the reliability of these sources and so on. From a Sunni Muslim perspective, those sources are as good as gold. And so that would have a 100% stamp of approval. If you have hundreds of Sahih narrations, that's as good as you get in Islam. So in other words, if you know anything about Muhammad, you know that he had sex with a 9-year-old girl.
Yes. And let me
And
just
he's
clarify. I don't believe any of this actually happened, as you know,
Mhm.
but that's a separate question from whether Muslims accept Sahih narrations as authentic and thus base Islamic law on them. And
Mhm.
so it's abundantly clear
Yeah.
from the
Oh yeah.
Islamic sources that they think Muhammad was having sex with Aisha when she was 9.
Yeah, and it's similar to like, do you believe God commanded fight those who do not believe in Allah? No, you don't believe he did that, but they do, and therefore
Yeah.
it's very, very relevant to what they believe. And even if someone comes along and says, "Oh, that's not what Allah meant," and so on, it's kind of irrelevant saying whether. I mean, you can obviously have the discussion whether these things happened or whether this command came from whether the Quran is the speech of Allah. That's separate from whether, hey, we've got a problem because you've got hundreds of millions of people who all believe in these things right now. And so,
Exactly.
yeah, just, I mean, being a Muslim and saying, I'm just going to say for the media, and maybe he actually believes it, maybe he believes it never happened and so on. Maybe he's not Orthodox, maybe he rejects the Sunni sources. All that is fine. Okay, how is that helping us in any way? You reject the sources that the vast majority of Muslims believe in. How are you helping? They would look at you and say, "We don't care what this guy says. We don't care what this guy says. We're quoting Muhammad, and he's saying, well, he doesn't like those sources and he rejects those sources. We don't care what you reject. Our imam accepts these as good as gold. Our sheikh accepts
Hmm.
these as good as gold. So this is what are we going to live by? The clear commands and example of Muhammad, or your feelings?" That's the response. That's the thing, Robert. It's the Western media clings to these guys and says, "Here's a Muslim who says this never happened. You see, okay, he's irrelevant to whether girls are going to be raped at 12 and so on. He's irrelevant. He's irrelevant in the grand scheme of jihad. No one is listening to him except people who want to listen to him because they don't want to be suspicious about Islam. It's a joke.
Exactly. So, a lot of terrible news coming out of Britain recently. These are things that go back quite a long time. It appears that the police were told to leave the rape gangs on the streets and try to get other ethnicities. They didn't want them bothered because they were mostly Pakistani Muslims. A migrant was arrested recently for trying to rape a 14-year-old girl, and he said, "I don't know UK laws. I only follow Sharia."
I've seen that multiple times in over the past month where people are sharing videos of an asylum seeker or something like that from Afghanistan who's there trying to have sex with a 12-year-old or 13-year-old or 14-year-old. And over again, they just say, "Well, I don't know the laws here." And a couple
Yeah.
couple of problems like, "Oh, okay, so wait, you're acknowledging you're a guy who sees nothing wrong with finding a 12-year-old and having sex with her and so on. So that's one thing. Two, apparently, it never crosses the mind of any any border security or anyone who's in charge of immigration in the UK to say, "Hey guys, you know you're not allowed to go around having sex with 12-year-old girls, to rape 12-year-old girls, to gang rape." Do you not know that? Because I mean, think with all the videos of people going trying to do it. I mean, think you had all the rape scandals, right? You're talking 41 cities in the UK where you had these rape gangs operating. An estimated 250,000 girls. You should look at that and say, a lot of these guys coming here seem to think it's perfectly acceptable to do this. And then you're catching all these guys even now, new people arriving, and they instantly start going and try to have sex with 12 and 13-year-old girls. And you catch them and they all keep going, we don't know this is wrong. Yeah. At some point, you'd think whoever's in charge of this would at least want to tell people, inform people in their language, a language that they can understand, so that they cannot claim ignorance later. When you're entering the country, here's a document. We're giving you a document to sign. Do you understand that you can't rape a 12-year-old girl? I want you to sign that. That way you can't claim to be ignorant about it later. But apparently no one bothers to mention this to them because it would be Islamophobic to tell them something. And that's simultaneously with you having indisputable concrete proof that these guys think it's perfectly acceptable to have sex, to rape, to gang rape, to drug, to pimp 12-year-old girls. And they won't even so much, the British politicians are so terrified, they won't so much as tell these guys not to do it, let alone arrest them and lock them up or kick them out of the country or something like that. They won't even say the words to them. They won't say the words because that would be Islamophobic.
And David, it gets worse, as these things so often do. Reform UK is a new political party, a relatively new political party in Britain that is gaining significantly because it wants to try to stem the tide of this mass migration. However, the leader of this party, the author of the Brexit initiative, Nigel Farage, has said in a recent video that the Muslim population of Britain is rapidly growing, more rapidly than the native population. And he said, if we politically alienate the whole of Islam, we will lose. If we politically alienate the whole of Islam, we will lose. What do you think?
I think, wow, you just played right into their hands, right? The goal is to keep multiplying numbers until you have to do what the Muslim community wants, which is what the politicians and police and journalists were all doing, right? We can't turn these guys against us, so we'll just have to do what they want. What do they want you to do in this situation? Look the other way as they rape and gang rape tens of thousands of young girls. And what are you saying for the future? Well, there's so many of them here now that we can't stand to lose them. So we have to get along with them and make sure we don't hurt their feelings.
Yeah.
You've already lost, Budrow.
Yeah, I think Britain, the UK is done. But we'll see. There are lots of surprises in history. You never know. All right, let's go to another country that's done, and that's France. In France, we have a story. Lots of jihad left this week, and time's a wasting here. So, Strasbourg, France, actually a Russian who is 22 years old. He moved to France with his family when he was 8 years old. And then he converted from Russian Orthodoxy to Islam, read the Quran, and now he is he's been sentenced for glorification of terrorism, for spreading jihad propaganda, and including ISIS material and inciting terror acts. And he also was spreading child pornography. You think there's any connection there, David?
No. What possible connection could there be, Robert? Come on.
Aisha, David, Aisha.
Oh, that. Well, yeah, there's that.
It seems to me that if you got guys going around, as we've seen recently with the Islamic apologists in the U.S., suddenly instead of denying that Aisha was 9, saying there's nothing wrong with marrying a child and it's just great, now that's happening, and we have the sexualization of children being justified by Islamic spokesmen, it's inevitable that there are going to be some who follow through on that in this way. So, over in Belgium, meanwhile, we had a man with a knife, and he was screaming a particular slogan. I hesitate to even ask because
Well,
the whole
there's no way
world
of knowing.
knows.
There's so many things a person might yell, Robert.
Yes, yes,
I
he
mean,
was
it's
yelling.
really it's really limitless, right? There's an endless different combinations of words. There's so many different thoughts that can be in a human mind. So there's just no end of things that a person might shout in these circumstances.
He was shouting, "This is MAGA country," and he went into the prime minister's office and wanted to clearly kill the prime minister, but he was arrested trying to get in. Prime Minister Alexander De Croo was shocked by the incident because, of course, he wasn't actually yelling "MAGA country." This is MAGA country. He was yelling "Allahu Akbar," and I don't think that Alexander De Croo had any reason to be shocked at all. He should have thought. He should have said, "What took them so long to do something like this?"
That would be better.
In Italy, oddly enough, on New Year's Eve, there were, let's see, 40 Muslim migrants who committed mass sexual assaults among people who were celebrating New Year's Eve in Milan in the Piazza Duomo. And so here again we see it, David. This is Italy, and this is a story. It's been going all over in Britain, and suddenly we're hearing all about it in Britain. But it's not just Britain. It is Italy, and we have seen it in Germany. We've seen it in France. We've seen it in Sweden, and it all is because it comes back to Islam.
And guys, if anyone doesn't know why this keeps popping up, I already kind of mentioned it. Surah 3, verse 110. You can put it all together. Surah 3, verse 110. I'll go ahead and say it here. Get this down. If you don't get anything else down, get this down, because it's going to keep happening again until people catch on. The Quran, Surah 3, verse 110. Muslims are the best of peoples ever raised up for mankind. Jews, Christians, other non-Muslims, Surah 98, verse 6. Jews, Christians, other non-Muslims are the worst of creatures. We're lower than dogs. We're lower than pigs. Allah has no love for us. Allah says it in the Quran. He has no love for unbelievers. That is a quote. Allah has no love for unbelievers, right? So that 12-year-old girl, Allah have any love for her? No. What is she? She's one of the worst of creatures. She's garbage before Allah. What should you treat her as? Okay, that's one. Two, as has been pointed out, the Quran and the Hadith both treat even prepubescent girls as appropriate objects of sexual attention, right? Muhammad had sex with a prepubescent 9-year-old girl. The Quran, Surah 65, verse 4, allows grown men to marry, have sex with, and divorce girls all before they've ever reached the age of puberty. So puberty is not a requirement. You don't have to. They don't have to have any respect for any sort of age requirements in your country. So you've got those two things, and then third, of course, very relevant, that the Quran and the Hadith allow you to capture. You are allowed to have sex with your wives in Islam and your captives and slaves. Now, to be fair, this is all you can say. As far as people who say, oh, this is not part of Islam, the grooming gangs and so on, this is not part of Islam. The only thing you could say is Muhammad's companions were not in that situation. They were in a situation where you conquered the enemy, then you took their wives and daughters as your sex slaves. And so they say, oh, but we haven't conquered Great Britain, therefore we don't have to. No, you can't conclude that. But they conquered them first. They conquered them first because they had to. Even the pagans weren't going to hand over their daughters and wives to you. You had to conquer them first. Then you could take their wives and daughters. They weren't dealing with a situation. They had no concept of people who would just give you their daughters to gang rape. It never crossed their minds that there could be something so depraved. So keep in mind, you are more messed up than Muslims could have even conceived in the time of Muhammad. And you are more pagan, Great Britain. You are more pagan than the worst of the pagans. You would just hand your daughters over. They couldn't have comprehended that. So anyway, if there had been a situation like that in 7th century Arabia, hey, Muhammad, we're going to go conquer this tribe and take their daughters. And then someone comes along and says, wait a minute. They said they'll just give us their daughters. In fact, they'll sit back and do nothing while we gang rape their daughters, and they're not going to do anything about it. And they say they'll actually defend us if we gang rape their daughters. You think they're worried about conquering these people? No, give us your daughters. Fine. We'll take your daughters. You're going to give them to us. We'll just take them. We don't need to conquer you. And so, why would you think that in Great Britain, well, since we're just handing them our daughters and saying, take them, do whatever you want to them, we don't care about them. Well, therefore they haven't conquered us. They kind of have. They kind of have. It's just they conquered you by calling you names. That's how they conquered you.
It was that easy.
Mm-hmm.
I got more evidence for all this, for what you're saying, and that is our friend, the renowned jihad preacher Zakir Naik, who said just this past week, and I quote, "Allah has provided specific guidelines for women, advising them to dress modestly and to cover their bodies, with certain exceptions such as the face. If, hypothetically, a woman chooses not to adhere to these rules and instead dresses in a manner deemed immoral, which may provoke inappropriate reactions leading to an act of rape, then who should be blamed? It is the girl's responsibility." Couldn't be clearer than that.
In the West, we call that victim blaming, but that's what we call victim blaming is just Islam in a nutshell.
Indeed.
In fact, Robert, and we know where he's getting that from. The Quran says, "What's the purpose of covering yourself?
So that you may not be molested." Chapter.
So that you may not be molested. And so, do the math, ladies and gentlemen. If the reason for wearing a burqa or hijab is so that you won't be molested, and you say, "Ha, I'm not wearing that," what's that mean? Means you're basically begging to be. Oh, I want to be molested, and so you fill a bunch of people with that in their thinking, and then you give them open access to a bunch of 11 and 12-year-old girls who aren't wearing hijabs or burqas, and who are therefore, according to Islam, just basically begging to be molested, and then you gang rape them, and everyone's shocked.
And what if somebody steps in? This is a heroic individual from India, Deepak Kumar, who rescued a minor girl from Muslims who were gang raping this girl who was 14, and Deepak Kumar stepped in and stopped them. And not long after that, he disappeared and recently was found dead, beheaded, and mutilated.
That's a warning to people. Don't get in our way when we're gang raping these girls.
Because it is a sacred act. It has to be understood that it's not just the Quran says this is okay, so it's okay to do. The fact that the Quran is Allah's perfect word and the eternal teachings of the eternal and only God, that indicates that they are serving God when they do this. They are serving their God, that is, not the real one. And so you interrupt them, then you have to be punished. All right, there's a great deal more, David, we got going on these things, and I think it was very good, really, to get into depth on some of these things. But very briefly, a lot more jihad. Benin, which we've talked about a few times, it's a place where there was no jihad activity at all up until quite recently, but now it's getting more and more common as we have spoken several times about the spread of the jihad in West Africa. And so in Benin, jihad group killed at least 28 troops in a raid on the army, and this is a recurring theme in the stories out of Africa. The local troops just seem to not be able to stand up to the jihad groups, and I think, who's funding and training and equipping these jihad groups? And why does nobody seem interested in that question? But that seems to me to be a very important issue. Niger, we had 5 people murdered in a jihad raid on a town, 40 farmers murdered by jihadis in Nigeria. And so the jihad proceeds apace in West Africa. In Sydney, Australia, they have called out the counter-terrorism force because of repeated graffiti on synagogues. And this is graffiti on one of the synagogues in Sydney. And it was interesting to note, David, that in all the news reports that I read on this, it said the graffiti consisted of the Nazi symbol and Hitler on top. And nobody mentioned that it also said Allahu Akbar. Now, the Akbar is obscured there. It seems to be crossed out or something. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But the Allahu makes it very clear what this is all about and who these people are who are doing the graffiti. But the media, characteristically, is ignoring that aspect.
Meanwhile, that's new.
Yeah, that's never happened before. One more that we might be hearing about more in the future. Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the Pakistani Taliban. They abducted 18 Pakistani nuclear scientists and stole a significant quantity of uranium this past week.
Oh, nothing to worry about there.
Nothing to worry about there.
Maybe they need it for their time machine.
Yes, they're going to go back to the time of the Khalifa Rashidun and live.
That is the goal in Islam, is for everyone to just go back to the 7th century. So
there you go. So everything will be okay then. So if the world is not exploded by the Pakistani Taliban, there will likely be more jihad over the next week, and we will be on it. So until then, pray, hope, and do not worry.